Hello everyone, today a very interesting video awaits you. I would like to ask you to support this video by liking and subscribing to the channel. Enjoy watching everyone. This story is about an unusual young man. His name was Tan Chen. When he went out into the street, all the people around noticed this, began to discuss him loudly and look at him in horror. Our hero was a freak. His face had terrible features. Sometimes he caught the glances of people who pitied him. Nobody wanted to be friends or communicate with the guy. It was especially difficult for him to please girls. Everyone avoided him. The teenager was aware of all this, but could not do anything about it. One day the guy went outside. Our hero thought that he was so ugly that even God could not stand it and laughed. He looked at the sky with clouds and thought about himself while standing on the road. At that moment, a large truck suddenly drove down the street. The young man was on his way. The sound of the impact was very strong. His body was thrown upward from the impact, and his bag and shoes flew to the sides. The truck driver was startled by the pedestrian's face when the headlights illuminated him. Out of surprise, he shouted that the young man seemed so ugly to him that he was afraid of him and caused an accident. Tan Chen was still alive, he was lying motionless on the road. The boy told the driver in response that everything happened because he was a bad driver of the truck, and not because of his appearance. Then the guy laughed. If a person makes a wish before dying, then it may come true in the next life. The young man thought how difficult it was for him to please girls. He wished to get rid of his terrible face. Everything is like in a dream, our hero thought when he saw the beautiful faces of the girls. They swam in the lake, covering their naked bodies with white cloths. The guy was surprised to see such a beautiful picture. Two beautiful girls came closer to him. They both had white, soft skin. Tan Chen thought that now they would be afraid of his face and run away, and his wonderful dream would end. The girls were getting closer and closer. The beauties took him by the hands. How come they weren't scared of me, he thought. One of the girls smiled at him and said that he shouldn't be shy, because they don't bite. Suddenly one of the girls noticed drops of blood on the teenager's face. She looked at him with sympathy and fear and wanted to help him. Her eyes filled with tears. She felt sorry for the guy. Suddenly the guy noticed his reflection in the water. Looking at himself, the boy realized that he was wearing women's clothes. He was no longer a boy, but looked like a girl. Two girls wanted to help wash him and began to undress him. The human body is reborn again. It was originally owned by a man named Tan Chen, who was from a family of martial artists. But he was weak, and he was expelled from his family in women's clothing. The young man wandered for several days, but no one accepted him. From hunger and thirst, he fell on the road. At that time, a girl was passing by on a horse and picked him up. She took him to the place where she lived. Only girls lived there. The beauties saw that there was a young man in women's clothing. They got very angry and tied him up. Men are not allowed to appear in their sect. The inhabitants of the sect did not believe his story. The ruler flew from afar, using her magical power to fly. The girl was floating in the air on a glowing sword. She was also angry when she saw that the teenager dared to infiltrate their sect. It was in vain that Tan Chen thought that since she was the sovereign, she should be wiser and more reasonable. She didn't even listen to his excuses. It was decided that death was the best punishment for him. The young man was on his knees. He begged for mercy in vain. None of the girls listened to his story. The guy felt that his life was about to end. He was shaking all over with fear. His appearance was pitiful. The teenager was tied with a strong rope. The lady stood over him, with a sword in her hand. She believed that such a death was the best way to be reborn, but because of this she no longer has a flag. Suddenly the sword, which was just about to cut off our hero's head, stopped. There was noise and voices. The young man thought that this could not happen, that someone would come to save him. The mistress turned around at the noise and shouted angrily, "Who dared to invade the sect's possessions and interfere with it?" She decisively raised her sword, preparing to meet the uninvited guests. Through the open window, high above, enemies appeared one after another. They seemed to fly in with the wind, jumping from a height. The ropes that bound the teenager were torn. He was free. These were 4 robbers, one of whom was very fat. After a minute, Tan-Chen thought that these guys were not such good guys. They looked very menacing and were armed. The fat robber, picking his nose, threatened the lady. He called her a witch and said that he would raze the place to the ground. The villain wanted the glory of the winners for them and for everyone to know their names. The girl thought that from the very beginning the young man was with the robbers for the same thing and that he participated in the plan to take over the sect. Her eyes sparkled with hatred for the guy. Tan-Chen shouted that the sovereign had mistakenly thought that he had nothing to do with it. He froze at the thought that the beauty thought he was a traitor. The fat man screamed at the young man, hitting him. The girl waved her sword and ran towards the fat robber. She was decisive and fast. But the robber remained in place and did not move. Another moment and the attacker will be near the enemy. Suddenly the boy saw that all the other girls were lying on the ground without moving. Neither of them even moved, as if they were fast asleep. The robbers stand over them and laugh. The lady grabbed her head with her hands, she felt very dizzy. The sword fell from her hands. She was just now beginning to realize that something was wrong, trying with all her might to remember what had happened. One of the robbers holds a bag of white powder in his hand. It was a sleeping pill. The villain shows it to everyone and says with an evil smile that they added powder to the water the girls drank. Our hero let out a scream. Now he understands that the robbers' plan was very insidious. The villains planned everything in advance. They managed to perform it perfectly, so that no one could stop them. The sleeping pills took effect completely, the lady fell to the ground and fell into a deep sleep. Her sword lay on the ground next to her. She was very beautiful and defenseless, the flowers in her hair had faded. One of the robbers grabbed the young man and asked the fat man what we were going to do with the boy. The threat of death again hung over the boy. His face was frozen in fear. The young man tried to quickly come up with something. The boy fell to his knees, folding his hands in front of him. The guy joyfully said how he admires the robbers, what a wonderful plan they came up with and whether they would like to take him as their younger brother. The teenager saw the girls tied up. They all sat on the floor and were tied with a long rope. The young man thought what the robbers would do with them now. He was a little happy about this turn of events. When suddenly the fat robber again suspected that the boy was against them. The young man was very afraid that he might die again and said that he had come up with an important thing, how to achieve well-being and prosperity. The 4 robbers stood in front of Tan-Chen and listened to him. He said that in battle everything is decided by the number of warriors, the more villains there are, the better it will be to rob. The guy suggested organizing a sect. Bandits from all over the world will want to join them. The long line of accomplices in front of the entrance to the sect will be endless. The sect will begin to commit evil acts and robberies around the world. The robbers really liked the guy's idea. They rejoiced and shouted. The boy suggested choosing the strongest of them, the one who would lead the sect and become the main one. The robbers armed themselves with swords and other weapons. They stood, waiting for the moment to rush into battle. The fat man stood in the center, expecting an attack from three sides. A cloud of dust rose as the robbers began to fight among themselves. They beat each other without mercy. Screams and the clash of weapons were heard. Our hero chose to leave this place immediately. The lady was lying on the bed, her hands were tied. There was a gag in his mouth. Her eyes were closed, but she was conscious. Clothes did not cover her long legs. The young man came to save the beauty. She opened her eyes and saw a guy who was showing her a sign to be silent. Tan Chen pulled the gag out of her mouth. The girl did not understand why he came to save her. Our hero sat down on the bed and untied all the ropes that tied the captive. He was calm. The young man explained that the events were very rapid and everything that happened was just a misunderstanding. Once free, the girl immediately grabbed the sword and put it to the young man's neck. The lady was sure of his bad intentions. She considered him an accomplice of the robbers from the very beginning. Everything happened so quickly that the young man did not understand how he again found himself in danger. Drops of sweat, one after another, flowed down his face. He asked the leader for mercy. The lady was sure that the guy was her enemy, who had just played out the last scene with her salvation. She was very determined. Her eyes shone with hatred for him. Suddenly 4 robbers burst into the room. They were armed. The villains realized that the boy had fooled them. The fat robber pointed at the teenager and shouted that the boy should be killed first. Our hero's face twisted with fear. A scream burst from his chest. Mortal danger is upon him again. Now the sovereign realized that the young man wanted to save her and everything was not as she thought. The fat robber's sword is raised above the young man's head. The villain screams menacingly and rushes forward at the boy. Suddenly something gets into the fat man's eye. He stops and starts rubbing it. The villain tries again and again to help himself. Finally he opens his eye. There is no one on the bed anymore. The girl and the boy ran away through the window. The robbers give chase. A girl and a boy, hiding from their enemies, find themselves trapped. They had to lock themselves in a stone room and break the door lock. The robbers stop in front of the door, but cannot open it. 2 brothers talking to each other. One of the villains shows a brown case and says that he recently bought poison from an old man, which can drive you crazy with its smell. The poison is sealed in a case. The fat villain tells the others that if the witch and the boy remained locked together it could be beneficial for the boy. He can take advantage of the situation and something can happen between them. Another brother objects that the witch will not allow anyone to see her body. He takes the brown case, opens it and places it under the door. A pungent smell permeates the stone room. The lady and Tan Chen are standing in front of a closed door in a stone room. The room becomes hot and stuffy. The young man feels this and speaks about it out loud. The young man and the girl look at each other, their gazes become more and more tender. They move closer and closer to each other. Drops of sweat from the unbearable heat flow down their faces. Suddenly the beauty turns away from the young man and heads towards the door. The room gets even hotter. She says she can't be here anymore. The guy tries to stop the lady, grabs her hand. The girl's foot slides down the step. She stumbles. The young man catches the girl in time, so that she falls straight into his arms. Their faces are close. They enjoy the touch of hands and bodies. They both want the same thing. The girl and the boy are like in a dream. Their lips are getting closer and closer. They give in to strong attraction and passion. They hug each other and merge in a kiss. After some time, the young man approaches the wall, on which a deity is depicted in the center. This is an old fresco made with colored paints. It seemed to him that someone was talking to him. During his lifetime, the deity was one of the best in this world. Suddenly the image tells the man to drop a drop of his blood onto the fresco. The young man, frightened by the unknown, turns away from him. The deity changes in the image. It got angry at the young man. How can a guy ignore it? A new evil image appears on the fresco, so the deity is angry with man. The young man looks at the girl who is sitting curled up on the floor. Her face is on her knees, hidden under her long hair. She is crying loudly. He decides to take a risk and believe in the deity. Our hero bites his finger on his right hand, from which blood begins to flow. He drips scarlet blood onto an ancient fresco, fulfilling the wish of an ancient deity. Suddenly the drawing begins to glow with a golden glow. Its contours come to life. Tan Chen stands in front of the wall and cannot believe his eyes. The girl, under the influence of magic, fell asleep for a while. The deity acquired the features of a man with long white hair that developed in all directions. It told the young man that it would enter his body for a while to help him fight his enemies. When the doors of the stone room opened, the four villains saw one boy at the entrance. They were sure, since the guy was alone, that he is confused and will not run away from them anywhere else. The young man folded his hands. He didn't even have a weapon. The teenager said that he did not expect that there were so few of them and wanted to fight them alone. Four robbers stood opposite our hero. The enemies were confident of victory and considered him very funny and amusing. They joked with him and were confident of an easy victory. The fat robber was the first to attack, followed by his three brothers. Each of them wanted to strike first, but their weapons bounced off as they approached the boy. Tan Chen surrounded himself with blue magical rays. This power protected him from his enemies. The villains, one after another, flew away from its influence. None of them could even get close to him. The four enemies were scared and retreated. They did not know how the young man received such powerful energy and became so strong. Suddenly a glowing sword appeared in the guy's hands. Our hero said that he had not used it in battle for a long time. It was a magical weapon. Tan Chen swung his sword once and four lights flew from the weapon towards the villains to stop them. The beams moved so fast that no one could escape from them. The four robbers tried to escape, but the magical weapons were stronger. Light rays wrapped around the bodies of enemies like ropes and knocked them to the ground. All of them were defeated by the young warrior's formidable weapon. Our hero emerged victorious. The golden glow left his body. He again became the young man he was before the deity entered his body. The lady left the stone room. The girl was confused and asked him where the four robbers were. The guy pressed closer to her and asked in fright when she woke up and what she remembered. The guy and the lady were nearby. The girl looked at the young man's hands and thought that there were no marks on his body from the battle or from the use of magical power. The lady and the young man were talking while standing in the courtyard. She decided to make an offer to Tan Chen. Since he protected them from robbers, let him remain in the sect and help with the housework. The girl could not offer our hero anything for this except her body. He didn't know whether to agree or not. The guy didn't want to be a laborer, but decided to try to stay in this place. Tan Chen stands in the courtyard of the women's sect. In front of him is a large deck with an axe on it. He is puzzled and surprised by his life in a sect where there are wives and concubines, but he is not very happy with his life here. A girl with a whip stands above our hero, and he lies below after a blow that he did not expect to receive. She orders him not to idle as he has a lot of work ahead of him. The guy is very angry. Soon the young man was left alone in his room. He sits deep in thought about his life here. Who can help him become stronger now? He remembers the deity who already helped him once. Suddenly a deity appeared and swung with all its might at the young man. Why did he fall to the floor? Tan Chen shouted at the deity, calling him a crazy old man who had not responded to his requests all this time. The deity in the form of a man with long white hair calmed down, his eyes were closed. It said it needed to regain its energy. The young man was afraid that he would be left alone without help. The sage winked slyly at the guy. He said that as long as the young man respected him as a teacher, he would teach him. The old man promised to be very demanding. The teacher looked carefully at the young man and said that first he needed to learn about the cultivation system of this world. In this world, spiritual energy is the foundation for any technique. There are 8 steps in total: elevation, heavenly step, silver moon, gen earth, mysterious neuritis, yellow shoot, frozen wind, body hardening. All levels are still divided into classes. Our hero was upset. His face became sad. He remembered that he was kicked out of the family due to the fact that the dirty blood could not temper his body. The teacher explained to him that this was not true. He remembered that when the deity took possession of the young man's body for the first time, he checked that his blood was pure. The young man began to hope that the situation could be improved for the better. But the deity was surprised, as it seemed to him that someone had deliberately sealed his blood. The teacher showed his student a piece of paper with hieroglyphs. He said that he needed to get a pill that would help clear his brain, unlock the seal and restore his vitality. Our hero's path extends to a high gray mountain. Its peak rests directly on the sky. There is a misty sect located there. It is Mount Ho. Even birds don't fly there. Tan Chen slowly walked up the narrow path leading up. He was very tired from his journey. The young man remembers that the teacher said that herbs were very common, but he had not seen them anywhere. In an instant, the traveler heard some noise similar to the sound of footsteps. It was as if someone was following him. Suddenly the young man fell from an unexpected push. Something heavy fell on top of him. He opened his eyes and saw a stranger on top of him, who fell on him because she tripped over a stone. The young man closed his eyes in pain. A drop of sweat appeared on his face. Everything happened so quickly that he did not understand what happened. The young man's body was on the ground. A girl was sitting on top of him. The girl was beautiful. She pressed him to the ground with her whole body so much that he cried out in pain. Blood poured from his nose. The two of them quickly got up from the ground and dusted themselves off. Tan Chen looked angrily at the stranger who grabbed his hand. She was apologetic and worried whether the guy was okay or not. Suddenly, the two of them heard someone growl. The sound came from above. There was a flock of evil creatures. They were very angry. Their appearance was menacing. The young man and girl froze in fear. The leader of the pack menacingly approached the people. He growled and showed his powerful fangs. It was a marbled leopard introduced into the mountains. The guy told the girl that animals usually don't attack people first. The beauty was scared. She said that she was collecting medicinal herbs when wild animals attacked her. Then the young man saw her basket lying nearby. A collection of grass spilled out of it. The guy picked up one of the plants and saw that this was the medicinal herb that he needed and that the teacher had told him about. He held the plant in his hand, examining its leaves. Suddenly the leader of the pack bent down on the girl, showing his claws. The leopard moved so fast that it was impossible to escape from it. The poor thing froze in fear. The young man rushed forward, protecting the girl with his body. Our hero shouted in fright that she should be careful. It so happened that the boy's hand waved the plant right in front of the leopard's mouth. Suddenly a miracle happened. The formidable beast became a small cub, he purred and ate grass from the hands of the young man. Then he started licking the man's hands. The guy thought how such a transformation could happen. The people sat down on the grass, they were surrounded by small leopard cubs, who happily ate the grass from their hands. The little animals purred and licked their benefactors. The plant that saved our heroes was catnip. It had a magical effect on the marbled leopards and they liked it. The little animals froze, looking at the green leaves. The beauty handed the basket to the young man with words of gratitude. Her eyes shone with joy. She said that he saved her, and then gave him all the medicinal herbs that she had collected. With gratitude, the guy took the gift, because he so needed all these medicinal plants. The girl began to move away from him, he thought that he would like to meet her again. The teacher was happy when he saw the basket. All the herbs, under the influence of his power, flew out of the basket and smoothly swirled in the air. All the necessary plants were there. After a moment, the sage was puzzled, he crossed his arms in front of him and thought. There was still not enough wood crystal to make the medicine. It was a very rare stone. Suddenly a small marbled leopard cub appeared on the path. He walked and was not at all afraid of people. In his teeth he carried a stone that glowed green. This was the wood crystal. The young man was very happy with the gift and raised the crystal high up, holding it in his hand. He gave the little leopard some catnip, which he quickly began to eat from the basket. Our hero closed his eyes with joy and daydreamed for a moment. But when he opened it, the crystal was no longer in his hand. Surprise froze on his face, and a cry burst from his chest. The young man saw a small brown monkey holding a wood crystal in its teeth. The monkey made faces and teased the person. The guy got angry with the little girl. The teenager immediately rushed to chase the thief. The monkey jumped out onto the tree and began jumping from branch to branch. She was high up in the tree. No matter how hard the boy tried, he could not catch up with her. At this time, not far from that place, one girl was swimming in the lake. She splashed in the clear water, washing her beautiful body on a hot morning, and after washing her hair, she twisted it high on the top of her head. Suddenly the girl heard a sound, as if someone was there besides her. She hurried to get out of the water and go into the house. A little monkey entered a dwelling that stood near the lake. She sat down on the floor to catch her breath and pulled the crystal out of her mouth. The thief held it tightly with both hands. The young man, chasing the monkey, made his way into this house too. He grabbed the cheeky little animal by the head. At the same instant, the crystal slipped out of the monkey's paws. The room was divided by a white curtain that hung to the floor. The crystal fell somewhere in the room. It landed on neatly folded clothes. Tan Chen was not as fast as a small animal. He was angry because the little animal jumped out the window, leaving a clump of brown fur in his hand. The thief eluded his pursuer and ran away. The young man bent over and began to look for the fallen crystal in the room. He decided to look behind the white curtain that hung to the floor. The guy was taken aback. There was someone behind the curtain. There was a girl there. He quietly said to the beauty, "Or she is not cold." A girl with long black hair was wrapped in white cloth. Her hair was wet. She was angry with the young man and asked him how he got into her house. The young man was confused, he was trying to joke. Our hero answered the question that they were unlikely to believe him, but he was running after the little monkey. The mistress of the house was seriously angry. Her expression became even more serious, and the sword flashed in her hands. The young man was on his knees. The young man closed his eyes in fear and squeezed his body. The situation was becoming threatening. He tried to tell her that it was all a misunderstanding. Suddenly, from the yard, through an open window, a woman's scream was heard. This was a medicinal plant collector whom the young man had met earlier. The young man was surprised by her arrival. The girl entered the room and immediately realized that the young man was in danger. She began to defend the young man in front of the mistress of the house and said that he did not want to do anything bad. The girl told how she met our hero, and that he was a good man who protected her from wild marbled leopards. The mistress of the house, after listening to the girl, softened. Her eyes became kinder. She said that the young man would not do this in the future. The girl and the boy were left alone. The owner of the house left them. They were glad to meet again. The guy couldn't believe that he was saved. Now it's time to get to know them. They held hands. The boy said his name was Tan Chen, and the girl said her name was Tian Mi. The beauty told the young man that she wanted to tell him something else. The girl raised her index finger and said quietly that she knew how to get into the Misty sect. High in the mountains among the green trees there is a sect. It is hidden from other people by a protective field that can only be opened by a member of the sect. This is protection from strangers and enemies. Tian Mi was able to remove the protection that the cultists had put up. She walked through the portal first and offered her hand to the young man. He boldly followed her. The two of them found themselves in a spacious room, in the center of which stood a round table. The girl went to the chest of drawers, where there was an antique box. The beauty said that she once lived here with her mother. The girl took a blue stone from the box. This jewelry belonged to her mother. She wanted to give it to the young man. The guy did not expect to receive such a valuable gift. He began to wave his hands, indicating that he would not take the gift. Tian Mi was persistent and said that she would be offended if he did not accept the stone. She gave him the jewel. The guy thought that for the first time in his life he met a girl on his way who was attentive and kind to him. This is the first beauty who gave him something as a gift and was so smart and beautiful. The young man and the girl stood next to each other and looked into each other's eyes. Tan Chen was so deep in thought that the girl thought he froze in place. Then the beauty said that she would leave the guy for a while. She tells him that there is something else she wants to find here. Suddenly the image of the teacher appeared in the room. He suggested that the young man leave this place immediately before anyone discovered them. The young man has a stone in his hand. He looks at it and does not know what to do. He thinks if he leaves now, the girl will be angry with him. At the time when the girl left the house, she was overtaken by the leader of the sect. He grabbed her by the hair. She was on her knees. The villain said that he had been waiting for a long time for the fugitive to return. Tan Chen was in the room when suddenly a woman's scream was heard. The guy looked out the window and saw a man grab Tian Mi. His face was half bandaged and he held a sword in his hand. Immediately our hero rushes to save the captive. But the teacher's hand stops him. He says that the young man would quickly leave the foggy sect. The young man comes up with a good idea. He invites the teacher to take over his body and fight with the leader of the sect. The teacher rejects the young man's proposal, since his strength has not yet been fully restored. Our hero remembers the stone that the girl gave him. He squeezes it in his hand. The teacher notices the young man's stone and joyfully says that this emerald is the core of the wood crystal. The young man was glad that now he had all the necessary materials for cultivation and could do it right away. The teacher firmly tells the young man no. After all, before this, the necessary stage is hardening the body. The sage explains that there is no hurry. If the sequence of stages is disrupted, a person can go crazy. He may not be able to withstand the stress and turn into a monster. The young man looks through the window at the captive, whom the sect leader tied to a tree. He has a weapon in his hands and he can kill her at any second. The teacher suggests, before anyone discovers them, to escape from the misty sect along with the stone. The sage again convinces the young man to run away. He predicts a good future for the guy, and talks about his new acquaintance in such a way that she is just a girl whom he has known for one day. The young man does not believe the teacher. He feels that he cannot leave the girl in trouble. The guy says he won't change his decision. The teacher tells the teenager that he now sees that he chose the right person as his student. The sage claims that everything he said earlier was just a test. The teacher begins the cultivation ritual. He closed his eyes and focused on the magic. The old man takes the materials necessary for the transformation, mixing their power. Positioned at the top, the teacher points his hand at his student, who is below, and reads a spell. Rays of light energy emanate from the highest power of the deity. Tan-Shen tries to go through the changes, but the seal works and he cannot clear himself. His whole body hurts, his heart can't stand the strain. Through the young man's clothes you can feel his heart pulsating. He is experiencing terrible overloads. The teacher helps him cope with energy. At this time, Tianmi sits pressed against a tree, afraid to move, so as not to anger the sect leader. She begs her enemy in vain to let her go. The villain calls the girl names and threatens her with his weapon. He says he didn't expect to meet her. The enemy swings at the girl, but then his hand movement is abruptly stopped by Tan-Shen. He holds his hand tightly in his hand. The opponent strikes with his fist. His hand is steady, he uses all the energy of his level, which is concentrated in his movement. From a strong blow from the enemy, the guy flies several meters away and hits the trunk of a tree growing nearby. The young man remains near the tree and cannot get up. The villain tells the defeated enemy with superiority that the young man kneel down and beg him for mercy. The young man's face was covered in wounds from strong blows. He looks defiantly at the enemy and is not going to give up. A moment later, the enemy looks around in confusion and does not see where the guy went, because he was just here. The young man rushed at high speed and hit the enemy from behind with such force that he immediately fell. The guy was pleased with his blow. The defeated opponent rushed to run into the forest. Tan-Shen approached the girl who was sitting near a tree with her legs crossed and her hands on her knees. She smiled at her savior. The young man asked if she was okay. The boy and girl hugged each other. Her eyes were closed. They pressed their bodies together and enjoyed a moment of peace. At that time, one teenager was nearby. He had a stick in his hand, and he was not wearing expensive clothes. He hit his head on a tree trunk. Perhaps he was sick. Our hero and the girl stood very close to the path onto which the traveler was able to crawl, a groan for help bursting from his chest. The two noticed the poor fellow. The young man and girl carried the traveler to a safe place. Tianmi recognized him and told Tan-Shen a story that one time when she was collecting medicinal herbs, she helped this man. That time, the beauty said, she saw how several hooligans beat him. They kicked him very hard, so that a cloud of dust formed. The girl tried to help the poor guy, but the hooligans tied her to a tree. She was gagged and unable to call anyone for help. The girl continued her story and said that the lady managed to come to the rescue in time. She appeared at the right moment and saved the prisoners. Since then, the traveler has been sick, as he was crippled. After some time, Tan Chen, Tian Mi, and the person they found unconscious ended up near the cliff. But here another danger awaited them. Black shadows appeared near the foot of the mountain. It was the leader of the sect, a man with his face half-wound with a white bandage. He was not alone, but with members of his bandy. There were a lot of enemies, all of them were armed. The villains lined up in one line, blocking the exit. There was no hope of saving our heroes. The girl tried to push Tan Chen away and said that the enemies only needed her and that the guy would run away on his own. Our hero did not want to run away. The guy proudly stepped forward, protecting the beauty. He prepared to attack. He didn't have any weapons. The enemies began the attack first. A heavy cannonball flew straight at the young man, but he managed to dodge. Blow after blow and the guy falls to the ground. A minute later, the enemies had already tied the guy up with strong white bandages. He was bandaged from head to toe, so that he resembled a mummy. The bandages wrapped around his body so tightly and did not allow him to move. The young man stood in the middle, for robbers held white ropes leading to his body. The leader of the sect stood nearby and enjoyed the sight of the tied-up guy. The tall villain approached the young man with a sword. The robber decided to strike a blow that would bring death to the prisoner. The young man closed his eyes. The villain shouted something and raised his sword over the guy's head. Suddenly Tian Mi jumped forward, protecting the young man with her body. The villain managed to stop his blow from surprise. The sword stopped right at the girl's head. The sect members decided to deal with the brave beauty for now. They tied the young man to a tree, and led the girl towards the forest. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a teacher appeared near the young man. He stood near the tree to which the prisoner was tied. The sage freed him from the ropes. The teacher restored Tan Chen's strength using his energy. So now the guy felt a surge of extraordinary energy in his body. All his abrasions and wounds have healed. The mentor shared with his student the knowledge of martial art techniques that he himself used. These types of control over one's body were supposed to help the guy fight his enemies. Members of the sect stood around the girl, their leader held the captive by the neck, lifting the girl high above the ground. The poor thing could barely breathe. The villain's strong hand squeezed her throat. She closed her eyes in pain. Tears flowed down my cheeks. The young man felt a surge of energy. In his hands was a long sword, which he raised in front of him. He was ready to fight. In an instant, the rays of light emanating from the young man's weapon defeated all the villains. An unknown force lifted enemies high up and threw them to the ground. All members of the sect, along with the leader, were defeated. All the villains were lying on the ground around the tree near which the girl was sitting. She looked at them and did not believe that the young man could defeat them all. After the fight, the young man lost consciousness for a while. Through the thin slit of his eyes, the young man tried to see who was in front of him. Tian Mi leaned over him with an anxious look. The guy began to remember what happened. The young man was in a cozy room on a large bed. There was a girl next to him. She put her hand on his chest and heard the guy's heart beating. Then the beauty climbed onto the bed. She knelt down in front of Tan Chen and said that in gratitude for her salvation she could give him tender moments. Her gaze was gentle and seductive. The girl exposed her body and approached the young man, offering herself. The young man did not want everything to happen like this. He said that he saved her for no reason and did not expect to receive anything in return. Suddenly the beauty rushed at him and sat on top of him. She spread his arms apart and pressed her whole body against him. The young man screamed in surprise. The beauty smiled with pleasure. The girl admitted that she pretended to be stupid and defenseless from the very beginning. She had been deceiving him all this time, using him as the earlier person they found in the forest. He was her toy. The young man's face became sad. He understood everything, the very minute he heard her story about pretense. Whenever she was kind to him, she was faking it. The girl called him names. The guy didn't want everything to happen here and so quickly. He didn't want the girl's affection now. Despite this, he placed his hand on her head, trying to stroke her hair. Suddenly, muffled footsteps were heard in the house. The step was very quiet and light. Someone wanted to remain unnoticed for a while. The sovereign entered the room, a sword in her hand, black hair flowing over her shoulders. Her dress was white, trimmed with purple ribbons. Her appearance was a salvation for the guy from this situation. Suddenly Tianmi jumped out of bed and started crying, wiping her tears with her hands. She told the guest that the guy pumped her with some kind of drug to seduce her. She sobbed loudly at this. The girl admitted that she wanted to die and put a sword to herself because she was no longer pure. She was so convincing that the lady believed her and not the young man. The mistress ordered to seize the offender. Two maids grabbed the young man by the arms and dragged him, not listening to his excuses. Everything happened so quickly that Tan Chen did not have time to come to his senses. The guy found himself locked in a dungeon. There was one window high up in the cell. The prisoner sat and thought how this witch, a herbalist, managed to deceive first him, and then also the lady. Suddenly a bright image of the teacher appeared in the cell. The young man was delighted at his arrival. He told the guy how he didn't feel the bad energy coming from Tianmi whenever she was around him. The young man was puzzled as to how he had not understood the girl's betrayal before. He asked the teacher whether he knew about the deception from the very beginning and why he did not tell him about the witch. The young man was angry with the teacher. The girl came to the cell where the prisoner was sitting. She again tried to seduce the young man with her charms and said that if he agreed, she could save him. But the young man rejected her caresses. The young man came up with a good idea on how to get out of prison. He approached Tianmi and whispered in her ear that he wanted to tell her a secret. The smile disappeared from her face and she became gloomy. The girl was surprised that the young man told her everything that happened between him and the mistress when they were in the stone room during the attack of 4 robbers. The herbalist thought that maybe it really was true that there was a connection between the queen and Tan Chen. She was upset about this. The girl wanted to leave this place and be alone. She was so upset that now she herself did not want the young man's attention. The beauty decided to quickly leave here. Then Tianmi decided to go to the teacher and ask her everything herself. But when the girl approached her chambers, she was told that the lady was not accepting today and that she should go home. While she was returning home, someone suddenly grabbed the girl from behind. The attacker turned out to be Tan Chen. She thought about how the guy managed to get out of prison. A young man dressed in a black cloak with a hood drags the girl along with him. He wants Tianmi to go with him to the mistress. The beauty does not understand why they need to go there. The young man unseals the entrance to the mistress's chambers using a red crystal. The girl thinks at that moment how such a precious stone came to him. After all, you can do a lot with it. Together they end up in the lady's bedroom. 2 square lamps stand on either side of the entrance. The girl asks the guy in a quiet voice what he intends to do. The lady was lying in bed under the covers, her hair was scattered on the pillow. Her face was pale, she looked sick, she could barely breathe. It seemed that life was gradually leaving her body. At the same moment, the young man admitted to the girl that he had brought her to help save the mistress. The guy took Tianmi by the shoulders and looked carefully into her eyes. He waited for what the herb gatherer would say in response. The girl said nothing and just walked up to the bed. She took the patient's hand and felt the pulse. The heart beat barely audible. The girl was very happy about this in her heart. Suddenly she turned sharply to the young man and said why she should save the sick woman. Her tone of voice immediately changed. She folded her hands in front of her and even smiled. The girl told the young man a story that once the mistress was a student and at that time the previous mistress ruled there. But there was also an elder who disappeared after all the changes. The girl continued her story and said that the two girls who wanted to rule and did not share the throne, have since then continued their feud in secret from everyone. At the end of her story, Tianmi joyfully looked at the sick woman and told the young man that the elder could take advantage of the death of the mistress and begin to rule in her place. Suddenly a transformation happened to the girl. She stood on all fours, her hair flew up, her eyes became clouded. The room was riddled with purple tentacles. They appeared here and there. A moment later, the young man was wrapped in tentacles like a rope. They had thorns on them that stung his body. Then our hero, unable to bear the pain, screamed loudly, drops of tears and sweat mixed on his face. The witch has transformed. She stuck out her tongue, licking her lips, her eyes burning with demonic lights. Her gaze this time was determined to put an end to this young man once and for all. The witch approached the guy, entwined with tentacles, took him by the chin and said that for the sake of her plan, she had endured the mistress for a very long time, but now she would be finished. Suddenly the witch froze, her gaze froze, she felt that there was someone else in the bedroom. The black shadow froze in a decisive pose, behind the white curtain, and carefully watched what was happening. It was a lady. She had a long sword in her hands. She looked healthy and determined, there was no trace of illness left. Moving quickly, the mistress found herself near the witch. The young man was freed with one blow from the mistress's sword. All the tentacles with sharp thorns fell to the ground. He was glad that the teacher arrived in time before the witch's magic strangled him. Tianmi realized that this was Tan Chen and the lady's plan from the very beginning, which they came up with when she came to see him in prison. They agreed to force the witch to show her true colors. The young man came up with a lot himself and shared the plan with his mistress. They executed their plan superbly. The witch did not sense the danger and will now be punished. Tianmi guessed everything and rushed to the young man with threats that she would finish him off right away. But her strength had already been spent. The witch could no longer do anything bad to the young man. After some time, one morning, when the elder was sitting in the lotus position and engaged in spiritual practices in her chambers, her servant came running. The girl told the elder that something had happened. The lady, upon hearing the news, immediately became angry. She said that the game, which had been going on for so long, could now be disrupted due to the fault of some boy of low birth. The young man stood in a spacious hall with large round columns. He was not there alone, but with a girl in a long blue dress, the mistress's maid. Suddenly the guy heard someone calling him and turned around. It was the Misty Sect elder. Her green eyes sparkled like two precious green emeralds. Her hair was neatly gathered on top of her head and pinned up. The lady radiated beauty and confidence. The elder said, turning to the young man, that she heard that there was some kind of misunderstanding, and she wants to fix everything. She smiled as she said this and was polite and friendly. A girl with long hair, without looking up, presented a small jug on a tray, which was tightly capped. It was concentrated chi energy that was beneficial for cultivation. The young man refused to take such an expensive gift. The elder insisted, she was talking about friendship. The maid quietly told him that all the girls admired his courage. Then Tan Chen decided to outsmart them. The young man told the girls why the elder wants to make friends with him, because he is an ordinary guy who does menial work. At the same time, he scratched the back of his head and tried to look like a simpleton. The elder and her maid looked at each other. The lady released the young man, who folded his hands on the back of his head and left the hall. His walk was free and carefree. The guy was walking home, the sun was shining brightly, so he closed his eyes for a moment. Our hero did not notice that a girl with long black hair was walking towards him. The stranger stumbled, falling down, she touched his chest. Our hero didn't even see her, since her face was half hidden by her hair. Everything happened very quickly. A drop of sweat ran down the guy's face. He thought to himself that this girl is very strange. His mood immediately soured. He felt changes in his body, but did not know what exactly happened. The guy returned home, and the teacher was next to him. Some strange malaise was felt in his body. He was very thirsty. He closed his eyes and almost walked towards the table, as if in a dream. The young man quickly grabbed a glass of water and began to drink in large sips, without opening his eyes. He didn't even hear the words of the teacher who told him not to do it. A moment later, the guy's eyes opened wide, his pupils enlarged, his complexion turned blue, and he stared at one point. Even the sound of a broken glass could not bring him back to reality. A moment later, the teacher took urgent measures to save our hero. The student was lying on the floor, the sage stood over him, instilling in him the light energy of life, and displacing the dark energy of death. The young man lay with a distorted face, instead of eyes he had 2 circles, and a large goose spider sat on his cheek. It lays an egg in the victim's body that feeds on blood and flesh, then the victim dies from it. The teacher knelt down in front of the student, he was worried about the guy. Little by little the boy managed to stand up and sit down. He felt better for a moment, but it was only a temporary improvement. A moment later, a sharp pain pierced the poor man's body. He screamed loudly in pain. His face turned blue again. Drops of sweat ran down his cheeks. Our hero could not open his eyes. The teacher couldn't believe his eyes. The bloodthirsty spider crawled out of the guy's body on its own. The young man was still lying there, writhing in pain, which was subsiding. He was still shaking, but he was starting to come to his senses. The teacher caught the spider and held it tightly by one leg. It was a large purple goose spider. It had 8 legs and 1 large head with small white horns. The young man and the teacher examined from all sides the insect that recently crawled inside the guy's body. The young man does not believe how an insect can exist in this way. The teacher held a small egg in his hands and said that this spider could turn into an egg when in danger. This medicine may have this effect on him. It could have been the work of an elder. An elder sat on a throne in a spacious hall, with her maids standing on either side of her. The lady was wearing a dress with a white train. She said loudly that the boy had thought through everything carefully this time. One of the maids, who has long hair covering half her face, is trembling. The girl looks away as if she has done something wrong. The young man who came to the mistress notices a maid with long hair and recognizes her. He thinks it was her, then on the path. The guy asks directly what the mistress wants from him. Our hero's face distorted when he heard the answer to his question. The elder, ordering the maids to leave, says that he wants him. He realizes with horror that the mistress wants intimacy. The elder extends his hand to the guy and asks if he has any objections to the proposal. She smiles at him and thinks that she is very attractive to him. The guy understands that they want to use him. The evil lady is up to something. He says that he will do this not only for himself, but for the sake of the sect. The elder begins his story to explain everything. Once upon a time, the Misty sect was not closed to others. Here, high in the mountains, where the brave eagles live, many people lived in a palace, men and women. Every day they trained their skills. All teenagers were involved in martial arts. From among them, a student of the mistress was chosen. The one who was the most courageous and diligent in training received this title. All the valuable things of the sect were kept by the mistress. Once, taking advantage of the mistress's trust, a boy, her student, stole almost all the treasures belonging to the sect from the closet. Having discovered the loss, the lady said that people are so unpredictable. The boy, whom the mistress chose as her student and trusted in him, committed this theft. Since then, all men have been expelled from the sect. None of them are allowed to come here. The Misty sect is now protected by a barrier that prevents intruders. Among other things, the sect acquired many enemies and envious people. Due to constant trials, the sect becomes weaker and collapses from year to year. The young man listened to the elder's story and understood her purpose. He told her, "So you want, with my help, to return the sect to its former glory and people." The elder stood up and loudly voiced her assertion to the young man that she could not just sit and watch her sect being destroyed. The young man stood in front of his mistress defenselessly. She said that everything she said to him was a secret and he should not tell anyone about their conversation. One early morning, two older sisters insulted the youngest. They stood over her with words of reproach and accused her of theft. The younger sister sat with her knees bent near the tree. A girl with light brown hair and a red mark on her forehead between her eyes screamed loudly that she had nothing. Our hero came to the screams in the forest. For a long time he watched from the sidelines as the sisters quarreled. Two grown girls were about to attack the little girl with their fists. Tan Chen remembered this girl who was bullied by her older sisters. She was the one who picked him up and brought him to the sect when his family cast him out. The baby was offended, and she often retired into seclusion, dreaming that someone would take care of her day and night. It's good that she had her Dan. This is a small round creature with round eyes and short legs. The girl, sitting on the ground, pressed herself against it, and it pressed against her. Suddenly one of the older sisters began her attack. She was so angry that she started throwing dark energy with her hands. Our hero came to the baby's aid, creating a protective field and throwing off the attacking sisters. The young man asked the girl if she was okay. The little girl also recognized the young man she had saved once. Dan also seemed glad to see the defender. The two sisters did not back down from their idea and were ready to act even more decisively. Their aggression was caused by something. The sisters thought that there was a connection between the young people. The younger sister shouted that it was not true, that she and the young man were not accomplices. She hugged her, being even tighter to herself. Dan was also outraged by the dirty accusations. The young man thought about the false accusations of his sisters. His face darkened. He told the girls that he once saved their mistress. One of the sisters shouted at the guy to shut his mouth and give up. She came closer and closer. Her whole appearance said that she was under the influence of something. The guy was tired of these accusations. He wanted to end this conversation. He pointed at the older sisters with his hand and said that he would tell the mistress about their impudence. The sisters, frightened by the young man, could no longer do anything except angrily shout words of threats. The baby was able to catch her breath and say that this time they were lucky. Dan was very serious, he puffed out his rosy cheeks. The girls began to move away from the boy and the baby, who remained standing under the crown of a large tree. One of the sisters, who has a triple energy aura, decided to teach the young man a lesson. She activated her energy, which glowed purple. My sister shouted that he was a simple worker. Our hero stood, stretching his hand and renewing his aura. The guy was very angry with all the girls' words. If you have watched up to this point, then I am very grateful to you, because this is where the video ends. If it's not difficult for you, then like this video and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to continue this story, then write in the comments. Thank you all, I love you all.